The day humanity officially joined the galactic community started with a hangover and went downhill from there. Captain Jack Harrington, representing Earth's Unified Space Command, stood in the grand entrance hall of the Galactic Council's meeting chamber, trying not to stare at the assortment of beings that surrounded him. The diplomatic handbook hadn't prepared him for the sheer variety of life forms that constituted the Council's membership. "Remember," whispered Commander Elena Rodriguez, Jack's second-in-command and the mission's cultural attach, "no sudden movements around the Vrexians. They interpret it as aggression." Jack nodded slightly, eyeing what he assumed was a Vrexian, a 9-foot-tall creature resembling a praying mantis crossed with a palm tree. Its compound eyes swiveled independently, scanning the room with unsettling precision. "Which ones are the Zolaxians again?" Jack muttered through his fixed diplomatic smile. Elena subtly pointed toward a cluster of bluish, gelatinous beings floating in what looked like personal aquariums mounted on hovering platforms. "The ones that look like angry Jell-O. They're the Council's senior members and our primary contact." The human delegation had spent months preparing for this moment. First contact had occurred just over a year ago when an alien scout ship detected Earth's quantum communications network. After initial remote negotiations, humanity was finally invited to send representatives to discuss potential membership in the Galactic Council. Admiral Petra Thompson, the head of the delegation, stepped forward with the ceremonial gift. They had brought a case containing 12 bottles of Earth's finest wines, each from a different continent and era. "We present these offerings as symbols of Earth's cultural heritage," the Admiral announced, her voice amplified by the chamber's acoustics. "Wine is one of humanity's oldest traditions, representing thousands of years of agricultural and cultural development." The council members reacted with a mixture of curiosity and what Jack could only interpret as disgust. A particularly agitated Zolaxian's blue mass rippled violently as the translator relayed their response. "You have brought fermented fruit excretions?" Admiral Thompson maintained her diplomatic composure. "Wine is considered a delicacy on our world. The fermentation process creates complex flavors that humans have enjoyed for millennia." The tall, avian-like being that served as the Council's chief mediator clicked its beak several times before speaking. "And you consume this substance? Voluntarily?" "Indeed," the Admiral confirmed. "It's customary to share wine during significant social gatherings and celebrations." A murmur rippled through the chamber as the translator relayed this information to the assembled representatives. Jack noticed several aliens recoiling, while others leaned forward with what appeared to be morbid fascination. One of the Zolaxians floated closer, its gelatinous form undulating with what the humans would later learn was their version of nervous laughter. "And what exactly does this wine do to human physiology?" Admiral Thompson hesitated, clearly sensing the shift in atmosphere. "In moderate amounts, it produces a mild euphoria and relaxation. It's primarily a social lubricant." The Vrexian's antennae twitched violently. "You deliberately consume substances that alter your neurochemistry for pleasure?" "Well, yes," Jack interjected before he could stop himself. "We also have stronger stuff if you're interested. Ever heard of tequila?" Elena jabbed him sharply in the ribs as the aliens exchanged what could only be described as horrified glances. The chief mediator's plumage flattened against its body, a sign of distress, according to their briefing materials. "Humans intentionally poison themselves for recreational purposes?" Admiral Thompson shot Jack a withering look before attempting to salvage the situation. "I wouldn't characterize it as poisoning. Exactly. It's more of a controlled substance that produces temporary effects. Effects that include impaired cognitive function, loss of motor control, and potential unconsciousness," the mediator stated, clearly reading from the data they had gathered on human biology. "Only if you're doing it right," Jack muttered under his breath, earning another elbow from Elena. The first diplomatic meeting of humanity with the Galactic Council concluded shortly thereafter, with the alien representatives making hasty excuses about needing to prepare for the formal reception later that evening. As they filed out, Jack couldn't help but notice how many of them kept a wide berth around the case of wine, as if it might explode at any moment. "Well," Admiral Thompson sighed once they were alone, "that could have gone better." Jack shrugged. At least they didn't laugh at our spaceships this time. No, Elena agreed. They were too busy being horrified by our drinking habits. Little did they know. The aliens' reaction wasn't just cultural shock, it was the beginning of a conspiracy that would test humanity's unusual biochemistry in ways no one could have anticipated. In a secured chamber 12 levels below the main council hall, 7 representatives from the most influential galactic species gathered in what they believed was complete secrecy. The room was electromagnetically shielded, quantum encrypted, and supposedly impervious to any known surveillance technology, certainly to anything humans might possess. High Counselor Glox, the senior Zalaxian, pulsated with agitation as his gelatinous form settled into the specialized containment chair. These humans are a catastrophe waiting to happen. Did you process the data on their biology? They consume poisons for entertainment. Vrek TA, the mantis-like Vrexian representative, clicked her mandibles in agreement. Their warlike history combined with their bizarre biochemistry makes them too unpredictable. They cannot be allowed full council membership. The avian chief mediator, whose name was Krill, preened his iridescent feathers nervously. The council bylaws are clear. We cannot refuse species membership based on biological differences alone. Then we must demonstrate that they are incompatible with galactic society, suggested Drawn, a squat, silicon-based life form whose rocky exterior concealed a calculating mind. If they were to misbehave at tonight's reception, it would provide grounds for their exclusion. The chamber filled with the equivalent of murmurs as the representatives considered this suggestion. What exactly are you proposing? Asked Glox, a ripple of intrigue disturbing his blue surface. Drawn's crystalline eyes gleamed. These humans have brought their poison as a gift. What if we simply enhance its potency during the ceremonial exchange? Krill's plumage fluffed with alarm. You're suggesting we poison the humans? Not poison, Drawn corrected smoothly. Their own data indicates they intentionally ingest ethanol, a neurotoxin that would kill most council species instantly. I merely suggest we add a stronger variant that their primitive systems cannot process. They'll simply become disoriented and belligerent, confirming our concerns about their stability. Vrekta tapped her forelegs together thoughtfully. Our research indicates that humans become aggressive and irrational when intoxicated. If they were to cause a diplomatic incident. Precisely, Drawn nodded, the movement sending crystalline dust floating around his head. The council would have no choice but to delay their membership indefinitely. What substance would accomplish this without being immediately detected? Glox inquired, now fully invested in the scheme. My species uses hexachronic acid as a cleaning solution, Drawn offered. To us, it's harmless. But to carbon-based life forms with oxygen-dependent metabolisms like humans, it should produce rapid neurological impairment followed by temporary paralysis. Nothing fatal, but certainly embarrassing enough to justify their exclusion. Krill shuffled uncomfortably. This approaches the boundary of council ethics. Does it? Challenged Vrekta. The humans knowingly consume neurotoxins already. We're simply giving them a stronger version of what they already enjoy. If anything, it's a cultural exchange. The alien representatives spent the next hour discussing the details of their plan, each contributing from their misunderstanding of human physiology. None considered the possibility that a species that willingly consumed poison might have evolved defenses against it. Remember, Glox cautioned as their meeting concluded, the humans must not suspect. They are primitive, but their military capabilities are concerning. This must appear as nothing more than an unfortunate cultural misunderstanding. As they dispersed to prepare for the evening's reception, Drawn secured a vial of the transparent hexachronic acid, a substance that his kind used to polish their crystalline growths, but which he believed would render the humans helpless and discredit them before the entire Galactic Council. What none of them realized was that hexachronic acid, while deadly to most oxygen-breathing species in the galaxy, shared a molecular structure remarkably similar to ethanol, only about twice as potent as standard vodka by human standards. The human delegation had been assigned temporary quarters in the diplomatic wing of the Galactic Council station. The suite was clearly designed with various alien physiologies in mind, with strange protrusions, unusual lighting, and environmental controls that occasionally made alarming noises. Captain Jack Harrington stood by the viewport, watching the swirl of stars and the occasional passing spacecraft. In the reflection of the transparent aluminum window, he could see the rest of the delegation preparing for the evening's reception. Admiral Petra Thompson was reviewing diplomatic protocols on a holographic display. Her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun that matched her no-nonsense approach to intergalactic diplomacy. After 30 years commanding Earth's defense fleet, she viewed this diplomatic mission as possibly more dangerous than any military engagement. "I still think we should have brought whiskey instead of wine," grumbled Dr. Marcus Way, the delegation's xenobiologist. He was a brilliant scientist with 3 doctorates and the social skills of a particularly awkward teenager. "If we're trying to impress them with our tolerance for toxins, might as well go all out." "We're not trying to impress anyone with our drinking habits," Elena Rodriguez corrected, adjusting her dress uniform. "We're attempting to establish cultural exchange through a traditional human custom." "A custom that clearly terrified them," Jack pointed out. The 4th member of their core team, Dr. Olivia Okafor, the linguist and communication specialist, looked up from her neural interface where she'd been studying last-minute updates to the translation algorithms. Their reaction wasn't fear, at least not entirely. I detected curiosity, particularly from the silicon-based representatives. "Great," Jack said with a roll of his eyes. "The rock people think we're interesting. The blue jelly people think we're monsters. Fantastic first impression." Admiral Thompson closed her holoscreen with a sharp gesture. "Enough commentary, Captain. We have one chance to get this right. Humanity's place in galactic politics depends on tonight's reception." Jack had been selected for the mission largely because of his unique background. Before joining Space Command, he'd worked as a cultural anthropologist specializing in first contact scenarios, all theoretical, until aliens actually showed up, of course. His talent for reading body language and social dynamics across cultural barriers made him valuable, even if his sarcasm occasionally created problems. "What's your assessment, Captain?" Thompson asked, giving him a penetrating look. Jack considered for a moment. "They're hiding something." The Zalaxians particularly seemed not just surprised but alarmed by our gift. "There's something about our consumption of alcohol that touched a nerve." "Perhaps it's a taboo in their culture," suggested Elena. "Or maybe," Marcus interjected, "they've never encountered a species that developed alcohol tolerance. Most species would find ethanol instantly fatal." Olivia nodded. "That tracks with my analysis of their language patterns." The translator rendered their reaction as disgust, but the underlying neurological signal suggested fear and confusion. "Which means we need to be extremely careful tonight," Thompson concluded. "No excessive drinking, no matter how tempting the circumstances. We stick to the diplomatic playbook." Jack moved away from the window with a slight smile. "So we're just going to pretend we don't know they're freaked out by us? That seems like a waste of negotiating leverage." "We're not here to leverage anything," Thompson replied sternly. "We're here to join the galactic community on peaceful terms." "And if they don't want us to join?" Jack challenged. A tense silence fell over the room. "Then we find out why," the Admiral finally said, "and we address their concerns like the civilized species we're claiming to be." As they completed their preparations, none of them suspected that the aliens' concerns had already led to a plot against them, or that humanity's peculiar evolutionary history had prepared them for this exact situation. Jack checked his dress uniform one last time, making sure the ceremonial dagger, a traditional accessory for Space Command formal events, was properly positioned. "Well, at least if it all goes wrong, we'll have some good wine to drown our sorrows." How wrong, yet ironically right, he would turn out to be. The grand reception hall of the Galactic Council station resembled a massive botanical garden crossed with an abstract art installation. Bioluminescent plants from 100 worlds provided gentle, shifting illumination, while anti-gravity platforms at various heights accommodated the different gravitational preferences of the diverse attendees. Captain Jack Harrington whistled low as the human delegation entered. And I thought Vegas was impressive. Focus, Captain, Admiral Thompson muttered. Remember the protocol. The human delegation moved through the crowd, drawing curious glances and the occasional alarmed recoil from the assembled galactic dignitaries. Jack noticed several species he couldn't even begin to categorize, beings of pure energy contained in specialized suits, amorphous fungal collectives that communicated through spore releases, and what appeared to be intelligent gas clouds held together by magnetic fields. Try not to stare, Elena advised, though she was clearly fighting the same impulse. Counselor Glocks approached, his hover platform bringing his gelatinous form to eye level with the humans. The Zolaxian's blue mass pulsed with what the humans were learning to recognize as formal greeting patterns. Esteemed humans, the translator rendered Glocks's vibrations. We welcome you to the ceremonial exchange. It is tradition for new potential members to share cultural artifacts with the Council. Admiral Thompson stepped forward with practiced dignity. We are honored to participate in this ancient tradition. At a gesture from Glocks, attendants brought forward the case of wine the humans had presented earlier, now arranged on a ceremonial anti-gravity platter. Jack noticed with slight amusement that the alien handling the case was wearing what appeared to be hazardous material gauntlets. As is customary, Glocks continued, his form rippling with what Jack now suspected was anxiety rather than ceremony. We have prepared your offering according to galactic traditions of hospitality. Jack's anthropologist instincts triggered an immediate warning. He'd studied enough Earth cultures to recognize when a ritual had been modified. What exactly does prepared mean, High Counselor? Dron, the crystalline being who'd masterminded the poisoning plot, stepped forward before Glocks could respond. We have simply enhanced the experience to honor human customs. Our research indicates that humans appreciate potency in their recreational toxins. Jack exchanged a quick glance with Dr. Wei, whose eyebrows had shot up in scientific interest. Something was definitely off. The ceremonial platter floated toward them, carrying elegant crystalline glasses filled with what should have been the Bordeaux they'd brought. Jack noticed the liquid seemed slightly more viscous than it should be, with an almost imperceptible iridescent sheen. Admiral Thompson hesitated for just a fraction of a second before taking her glass. The rest of the human delegation followed suit, diplomatic training overriding their suspicions. Around them, the assembled council representatives watched with what Jack could only interpret as morbid fascination. The Vrexian delegation's antennae were twitching in synchronized anticipation, while several smaller species had moved to higher gravity platforms, presumably for a better view of whatever spectacle they expected. It is customary, Glocks announced, his voice translated with a slight tremor, for the visiting delegation to consume their offering first, demonstrating its safety and their commitment to cultural exchange. Of course, Admiral Thompson replied smoothly. She raised her glass in a toast. To new friendships among the stars. Jack caught a whiff of the wine and immediately recognized the sharp, chemical undertone that definitely wasn't part of the original vintage. He'd spent enough time in college chemistry labs to recognize the smell of a higher alcohol, something closer to industrial cleaning fluid than fine wine. They're trying to get us drunk, he realized with a sudden clarity that was almost funny, or possibly incapacitated. As protocol demanded, Admiral Thompson took the first sip. To her credit, her expression remained diplomatic even as she swallowed what Jack was now certain was wine laced with some alien compound. The aliens watched in breathless, or whatever passed for breathing among their diverse physiologies, anticipation. When nothing immediate happened, the rest of the human delegation followed suit. Jack took a careful sip and immediately identified the burning sensation of strong alcohol, though with an unusual aftertaste that reminded him of anise and copper. Dr. Wei's eyes widened slightly as he tasted his drink, and he gave Jack an almost imperceptible nod. The xenobiologist had also recognized that something was amiss. Seconds passed. Then minutes. The humans continued to sip their enhanced wine while the alien delegation grew visibly agitated. Is the potency satisfactory? Dron finally asked, crystalline features impossible to read but voice betraying confusion. Quite smooth, actually, Jack replied casually. Reminds me of a strong grappa I had in Italy once, though I detect some interesting additional notes. Elena, catching on quickly, nodded in agreement. Indeed. Complex bouquet. What exactly did you add to enhance it? The question sent ripples of consternation through the alien representatives. Phlox's blue form was pulsating rapidly, while Krill's feathers were completely flattened against his body in what they now recognized as extreme distress. You appear unaffected, Vrek TA stated, mandibles clicking rapidly. Admiral Thompson smiled diplomatically. Should we be otherwise? The wine is stronger than expected, but quite palatable. The human delegation continued to calmly sip their doctored wine, while around them, the carefully orchestrated plot to embarrass humanity before the Galactic Council dissolved into confused murmurs and agitated appendage ringing. The grand reception was rapidly devolving into chaos, at least from the aliens' perspective. The human delegation continued to calmly sip their enhanced wine while various council representatives communicated in urgent whispers and alarmed gestures. I believe, Jack said quietly to Admiral Thompson, that our new friends expected us to be on the floor by now. Thompson gave an almost imperceptible nod. Dr. Wei, assessment? The xenobiologist discreetly analyzed his drink using a tiny sensor embedded in his ceremonial ring. Approximately 80% ethanol with trace compounds I can't immediately identify. Roughly equivalent to 160 proof earth spirits with some alien additives. In other words, Elena translated, they tried to get us hammered. Or worse, Wei added. Based on their reactions, I suspect they expected neural impairment or possibly unconsciousness. Jack couldn't help the small smile that crept onto his face. They poisoned our wine, not realizing we're the species that invented moonshine and absinthe. Admiral Thompson maintained her composure, though Jack detected a hint of amusement in her eyes. Let's not jump to conclusions. This could be a cultural misunderstanding. A misunderstanding that conveniently involves slipping us Mickey? Jack countered. Their conversation was interrupted as Drawn approached, his crystalline form making small tinkling sounds with each movement. Humans, your resilience is unexpected. Our research indicated this concentration of neural inhibitors would produce significant impairment. Jack raised an eyebrow. You mean you deliberately added something to our wine expecting it to incapacitate us? Drawn's crystal facets reflected light in patterns that suggested discomfort. A cultural exchange. We merely wish to observe how humans respond to more potent versions of their recreational toxins. Without informing us, Admiral Thompson stated flatly. A tense silence fell over the immediate area. Other council representatives were watching the exchange with varying degrees of alarm and fascination. Dr. Olivia Okafor stepped forward, her expertise in communication proving invaluable. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding about human biochemistry. The substance you added, may I ask what it was specifically? Hexachronic acid, Drawn admitted reluctantly. A compound that serves as a cleaning solution for my species, but which our data suggested would produce temporary neural disruption in oxygen-dependent carbon-based life forms. Dr. Wei couldn't suppress a short laugh. You essentially gave us alien vodka and expected us to pass out? By now, High Counselor Glox and the other conspirators had approached, realizing their plan had gone horribly awry. We don't understand, Glox's translator conveyed, his blue form rippling with confusion. The concentration should have been sufficient to render your species temporarily non-functional. Our research indicated ethanol alone impairs human cognition at much lower concentrations. Jack took another deliberate sip of his enhanced wine. Oh, it's definitely strong. I'm feeling a pleasant buzz. But humans have been consuming fermented and distilled beverages for thousands of years. Our livers are specifically evolved to process these toxins. Impossible. Vrek TA clicked her mandibles in agitation. No rational species would evolve to consume neurotoxins regularly enough to develop biological defenses. Welcome to Earth, Jack replied with a grin. Where our everyday beverages would kill most alien species. Our snack foods often contain capsaicin, a literal chemical weapon, and we consume caffeine daily to artificially stimulate our nervous systems. The aliens exchanged looks of horror as this information was translated. Your species voluntarily consumes multiple different toxins, Krill asked, his avian features registering shock. Admiral Thompson, realizing they now held a significant diplomatic advantage, stepped forward. Humans have evolved in a challenging planetary environment that required adaptation to various compounds that might be harmful to other life forms. What you intended as sabotage is, for us, merely a slightly stronger version of a social beverage. In fact, Jack added, pulling a small flask from an inner pocket of his uniform, if you really wanted to see humans impaired, you should have tried this. He held up the flask of Kentucky bourbon he'd smuggled along despite protocol restrictions. Now this might actually get us into diplomatic trouble. Dr. Wei looked alarmed. Captain, that's against regulations. But is attempting to poison a diplomatic delegation, Jack countered, yet here we are. 3 hours later, the grand reception hall had transformed from a scene of diplomatic tension to something resembling an intergalactic frat party. After the initial revelation and subsequent formal apologies from the Galactic Council leadership, Admiral Thompson had made a calculated decision. Rather than filing official protests about the attempted sabotage, humanity would demonstrate its unique physiology and tolerance in a more constructive way. Jack stood by a refreshment platform, watching with amusement as Dr. Wei carefully explained the distillation process to an enraptured group of silicon-based beings who had never conceptualized consuming liquids for pleasure. The ethanol molecule affects our GABA receptors, Wei was explaining, clearly in his element. It's technically a depressant, but in moderate amounts it reduces social inhibitions and creates mild euphoria. Fascinating barbarism, chirped a small, feathered being, who had cautiously dipped what appeared to be a sensory appendage into a drop of bourbon, and was now experiencing the effect through some form of osmosis. Across the room, Elena had organized what she called a responsible sampling of various Earth spirits that had been stored in the diplomatic shuttle. Under her careful supervision, curious aliens were experiencing minute quantities of everything from sake to scotch. The cultural variations are as interesting as the chemical ones, she explained to a hovering cloud of sentient plasma. Different human societies developed distinct fermentation techniques based on available resources. Even Admiral Thompson had relaxed her usual rigid protocol, recognizing the diplomatic opportunity presented by this unusual turn of events. She was engaged in serious conversation with the council leadership, who now regarded humans with a mixture of horror and newfound respect. Your species evolved on a death world, High Counselor Glocks was saying, his gelatinous form now a more relaxed shade of blue. The conditions you describe, predators, climate extremes, environmental toxins, would be unsurvivable for most council species. We prefer to think of Earth as challenging rather than deadly, Thompson replied diplomatically. Those challenges shaped human resilience, including our unusual biochemistry. Jack approached the group, glass in hand. Which is why your attempt to incapacitate us backfired so spectacularly. Hexachronic acid is basically just spicy vodka to our metabolism. Krill, who had abandoned his earlier conspirator role to embrace scientific curiosity, fluffed his feathers in what they now recognized as excitement. Your species' adaptability is remarkable. Most council races evolved in carefully balanced ecosystems without the need to process toxins. Perhaps, suggested Vrek TA, who had joined the conversation, humans serve an ecological role we've not encountered before. A species that can safely process compounds toxic to others could be valuable. Jack raised an eyebrow. Are you suggesting our place in the galaxy might be as the species that handles the hazardous waste? I prefer to think of it as specialized environmental adaptation, Admiral Thompson interjected smoothly. Every species brings unique capabilities to the galactic community. The reception continued well past its scheduled conclusion. By the end of the evening, several significant developments had occurred. The Council had unanimously approved Earth's preliminary membership application. 3 alien species had requested permission to study human medicinal chemistry. And Drawn, the original architect of the poisoning plot, had developed what appeared to be genuine admiration for humans after Jack taught him the concept of toasting. As the event finally wound down, The human delegation gathered near the viewport overlooking the spectacular nebula outside the station. "Well," Admiral Thompson said, allowing herself a small smile, "that was certainly not how I expected our first diplomatic function to proceed." "They tried to poison us and ended up with an interstellar happy hour," Jack remarked. "I'd call that a win for human diplomacy." Dr. Wei nodded thoughtfully. "They're still processing the fact that our biology treats as recreational what their biology considers lethal. It's given them a healthy respect for Earth." "Fear, you mean?" Elena suggested. "A little fear in diplomatic relations isn't always a bad thing," Thompson replied, "especially when it's balanced with curiosity." Olivia, who had been monitoring communications throughout the event, looked up from her neural interface. "The Council's internal updates have reclassified humans from potential members to priority integration species. Apparently, our ability to detoxify compounds has significant applications for several ongoing galactic projects." Jack raised his glass in another toast. "To humanity's unexpected superpower, the ability to drink almost anything and live to tell about it." As they clinked glasses, Jack caught sight of Drawn across the room, the crystalline being carefully handling a tiny glass of bourbon with specialized appendages. The alien noticed Jack watching and raised the glass in a perfect mimicry of a human toast. In that moment, Jack realized humanity had found its place in the cosmos not through superior technology or military might, but through the bizarre evolutionary quirk that allowed them to enjoy a good drink, a trait that had nearly gotten them expelled from galactic society before earning them a permanent seat at the table. Humanity's tolerance for toxins developed over millennia of drinking everything from mead to moonshine had unwittingly prepared them for their first interstellar diplomatic crisis. In a galaxy full of beings that had evolved in carefully balanced environments, humans were the crazy party animals who could metabolize poison for fun. And somehow, that made perfect sense. As an old Earth saying went, "In wine there is truth." Or in this case, in poisoned wine there was humanity's ticket to the stars.